Hello, and welcome to the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Two friends with oceans of notions discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery, and crack. We have a Patreon at Weshtern Philosophy Pod, don't forget the H. If you're enjoying the show and would like to see it grow, you can join this, or make a once-off donation via Ko-fi.com. Both links are in the show notes below. Today, we are joined by broadcaster, music lover, and oral history curator Paula Carroll to speak about local history, introspection, understanding our time and our society, and the conflict in Gaza, all touched on by the topic of voice.
Like, we're all on some quest to understand ourselves and understand who we are as individuals and who we are broadly in a society. Whether you express that verbally or in any other way, or whether you don't express it at all, as humans, that's the journey we're on. You know, whether you end up being a street fighter or being an artist, it's all about trying to reach what your essence is.
Right. We are here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Bart. Bart nods. That's great. That's great content for a podcast.
I just know that frustrates you so much. So I love doing stuff like that. It's so evil. He does all the hard work, and I just always get to mess around, and I love it so much.
Well, thank you, Bart. Thank you, Bart's blandly nodding head, and welcome to our guest today, broadcaster, curator of oral history, font of knowledge and blank of mind, recently blank of mind, Paula Carroll. Paula, I have been excited about having you on since basically we started the podcast.
I can attest to this. He's not promoting you.
No,
that is
one of the
true.
first guests when we were like brainstorming guests. One of the first people I wanted on was you, and you are
no pressure at all. Then,
you're such a busy woman. You're off doing so many different things that it's taken some time. But you're here now. I'm feckin' delighted
to be here because I realise the older I get, I need to do more of this stuff, which is just about slowing down and. Sorry, I'm hitting your microphone. Slowing down and just having conversations and going deep. I'm in a going deep phase of my life at the moment, so thanks for the invite.
We love it. We think we're in a similar phase.
Always.
You sent through a bunch of ideas, Paula, and you know, we were kind of talking about the format of this show, and when somebody comes on, especially somebody who has as many strings to their bow, and again, I'm not plumosing you, but you do quite a few different things. So I was quite curious to see, you know, what you would be interested in talking about. And we had a quick phone call, and I think basically what we were chatting about there is we love it when people come in and they're just talking about whatever's alive in them at the moment, Paula. You know, if I talk about all the work you do, I'm talking about things you do in the past, but I'm really interested in talking to Paula Carroll today, you know? And so how is the Paula Carroll of today, and what would she like to talk about?
Oh God, I was hoping you'd ask me really specific questions. What would I like to talk about today? I think that over the last good while, because people often say what you said about me, which is that I've so many different strings to my bow. And I actually don't think that's true. I think I've just got the one tune because I see what connects the various different things that I do. And it's like, it's just this one obsession. I am interested in loads of different things. But I'm probably interested in them for the same reason. And now you want me to articulate what that reason is, and that is actually hard. But it's like telling, this is so vague now, but it's like holding a mirror up to who we are and what we are, and that who we are and what we are for me now is just where I live and who I live with and the society that I live in, and what that is over the long term, like not just the part of County Clare I live in now and the changes that have happened and what it looks like, but really, You know, why do people live out the country in Ireland in single houses around the place and farm the way we do and have pubs and socialise in them and sing so easily and play music so easily and express ourselves so freely in one way while being totally clamped in many other ways? It's like, who are we? And how do I, as a broadcaster, oral historian, music creator, podcast producer, how do I reflect that? How can I reflect that? How can I explain that to myself? How can I interpret it so that other people get what I get out of it? So that's my guiding light, and that's what and I've done a lot of travel as well in my younger years, and that's always what I'm interested in, whether I'm in Kyrgyzstan or Nicaragua. I'm going, who are you and what makes you tick and why are you the way you are and why do you live nomadically and why did you have this revolution in 1979 and what is it? What songs do you sing? How
Test
do you
one,
see
two.
yourselves?
Test one, two.
You know, that's it for me. And this morning, when I did my best thinking about what I would say to you, the Seamus Heaney poem, that beautiful poem, Personal Helicon, came to me, and the last couple of lines where he's explaining why he's a poet. And he says, I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing. And the poem was actually about how he was fascinated with wells as a child and how he would look into them and shout into them and hear the echoes coming back. And now that he was a dignified adult, he couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So he rhymed instead. And I thought, whatever it is I do, and I am a bit of a magpie in terms of the things I'm interested in or how I'm interested in capturing them, but it's always to see myself, to set the darkness echoing.
That's stunning, Paula. Yeah, I hear you. I guess what I'd be interested in asking is, and it feels so trite. Sorry, I feel like we should let that breathe.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was thinking. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah.
And it just set off like 20 different little directions of my brain. And these days when that happens, to Anthony's chagrin, I just go, because it is still an audio medium. Yeah. But I think that's so beautiful. It put me in mind a little bit of a lighter version of that. Was I was doing a songwriting workshop with John Spillane, and he said, I love rhyming because it connects everything in the world to everything else. And he has this thing about, what's that music shop in Cork called?
Crowley's.
Yeah, and it's
where
like
Gallagher bought his guitar.
and he's talking about like he's in Crowley's music shop. There's a huge Fender or a Marshall amp stack. The past is gone, and it's never coming back. And I thought that was brilliant because it's like something really small and material to something vast and immaterial, and that kind of feels like what you're saying there. But there's a darkness to it as well, to that Heaney quote. Like it's nearly as if we are in a dark room trying to see what comes back.
Well, like we're all on some quest to understand ourselves and understand who we are as individuals and who we are broadly in a society. Whether you express that verbally or in any other way, or whether you don't express it at all, as humans, that's the journey we're on. You know, whether you end up being a street fighter or being an artist, it's all about trying to reach what your essence is, you know. So in a way, I don't see that as dark at all. It's just, it just is. You get born and you're on that journey until you die, you know, and you're not always aware that you're introspecting or figuring yourself out, and you maybe not everyone's verbally articulate, but we're definitely all there. You know?
Yeah, so maybe even that symbolic darkness isn't like dark, but it's more a bit of the unconscious that we're making conscious in a way.
Yeah, well, Heaney says, and I wish I had the poem in front of me, but because he was talking about shouting down into the well, and then his own voice comes back, the echo, but as he says, like a new clean music. I think I'm badly quoting it. So it's like you put something out there and the echo comes back and it's you, but you're seeing or hearing yourself differently, or you're reaching some new way of understanding yourself. So in that poem, I think, and the way I understand it, is the darkness is just, it's a medium. You set it echoing so that it comes back to. It's not dark as in the opposite of light, I don't think, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's brilliant. And that's so true, I think, as well, because so many little tangents I'm thinking about. But like your medium is mostly audio, which to me is also the most. Oh, shouldn't do that with a lav mic. Sorry, there's two professionals in front of me. I have to be careful. But they're like, to me, it's also the most connective medium is audio, and like with these conversations or the conversations that we have as well, like I would so often throw something at Anthony where I'm like, I'm sitting with this thing and this is how I feel about it, and he would echo it back at me completely differently, and I go, oh, okay, that's another way of looking at it, and that's very. I'm just rambling now, but it feels there's something meaningful to that, and I loved when we were just chatting about, like, I love the radio you do on Clare FM. I love it so much, and it's nearly the only radio I listen to at the moment, and there is a sense of connection and community in it. Was what you were saying, and that's 100% how I feel as well. It doesn't feel like just putting something out. It definitely feels like something is coming back as well. Even though you're doing most of the talking, I suppose.
No, it is. And like we were talking off air, as they say, and I was saying, like, in Clare FM, we didn't create community through those radio shows. The community was there, but in 1989 and 1990, they had no way to talk to each other, except that they would meet each other at concerts and events. But there was no... This is what I think is the most important role for any radio, TV or media, is to reflect what's around it. So there was no local radio in Ireland except for pirate radio. So there was nothing that reflected back the music community of County Clare. But that community was there, you know. So then the radio comes along and they decide to do like 12, 13, 14 hours of traditional music a week, and then suddenly that community had a way of coming together, and it's always been a two-way street, you know. So it may sound to you like we're doing all the talking, and we are, but boy, are people talking back to us, and they've no qualms in telling us, you know, what we should be playing, what we should be doing, and, you know, too many jigs and hornpipes there, you need more reels, this is County Clare, and what are you doing with those old songs? Like, the approach to singing has changed, actually, in 35 years, but there was barely a tolerance for singing at the beginning, like it was all instrumental music, so you'd be told, like, if you were playing too many songs, and that's all changed now. So so that to and fro has always been there. And this, like traditional music, it's now professional music as well, but its essence is a community music. You know, it's about people entertaining themselves. Not necessarily, you know, a big session with 15, 20 people. That's a relatively modern thing, you know, since the 60s and 70s. But it was always about community. It was always about self-entertainment. I don't know how we got onto that.
100%.
Sorry, I can't remember what the theme was.
I'm throwing out all the wild stuff, but it's interesting. It's interesting because it's all deeply meaningful what you're saying. It's just sometimes I think the cerebral kind of mind can't really touch on it, but because all of that like we find this a lot playing sessions, that audience communication is so strong, and there is that literal communication of them going, geez, Paula, why are you playing polkas? You know, don't be doing, we love playing polkas, by the way, but it's funny, there's only
polkas
a few,
are fantastic.
there's only a few, like, you know, our good friend Trisha D will be listening to this, she's the Polkahantas, as we say, the queen of the polkas, but she's from Limerick. But it's, people don't always know how to play them here. But anyway, that's a whole different story. But apart from that literal response you're getting, there's also the energetic feedback, because we've said this quite a lot, I think, to when people have gone, that was a great session. We usually say to people like, yeah, and you were part of it. And that isn't like some kind of, hey guys, some kind of nice sort of thing to say. It is as well, but it's 100% true, because if they don't, and luckily it doesn't happen very often, but I was recently playing a wedding buffet kind of thing, and it was just nothing coming back, where you're nearly like, is the amp on? Is there anything, you know, it's not even like they don't like it, but they're not interacting with it.
You're shouting in the darkness.
Yeah,
there's no echo coming
Exactly, there's no echo at that point. And then it really falls quite flat. And then usually you turn to the person you're playing with and you make sure you have a good time and you create that self-entertainment. But when there's a great session, it lifts the room, like we've said before. And that is 100%, nearly 50-50 on the performance and the audience.
Yeah.
What I think is fascinating about that is because I'm still thinking about you shouting into the well, Paula, because I think sometimes you might be the person shouting and sometimes you might be the darkness echoing back.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I have heard you interviewing oh my God, what was Kitty Lydon?
Kitty Lydon,
yes. And you know, when you're interviewing these older people, so as part of Cuimhne von Clare Memories, you know, you collect the oral history of Clare, you interview older people and then put it together into that wonderful podcast. I've been binging it lately, the Biddy Early episode and the biodiversity episode. But these older people are not used to sitting in front of a microphone and having somebody interview them. They're used to the chat, you know. And you have a wonderful way of allowing that space where they can go, they can self-express, but also like asking the right questions and like keeping them like, guiding them gently and humorously and very warmly and stuff. You're a wonderful
Very
interviewer,
warmly.
but but again, it's not, you're doing it to facilitate that. And I'm just thinking of that these older people whose like their incredible skill is conversationalism, or the ability to tell tales. But you're bringing it into a recording medium. You're helping them shout into the darkness of the well, and the echo comes back as something that hopefully can be enjoyed for decades or generations to come.
It's my favourite thing to do.
Is it?
I love it. I love talking to older people who have a different kind of knowledge and a different way of expressing themselves, and a way that we don't hear so much anymore because of that disconnect between the kind of media that are available to us and because of what that kind of use of language requires. So, but I know that when you do it, when you bring someone like Kitty out into the public, and she doesn't need me to bring her out into the public. Like, you know, she's not a shy woman. She's a very creative woman herself, and she's a brilliant storyteller, and she knows she's a brilliant storyteller, and she knows how to communicate to an audience. So I'm not saying that I'm bringing this bumpkin from the darkness out into the light or anything, but I know that her kind of voice isn't heard as much anymore. But I know that when people do hear it, everyone connects.
Yes.
So it's not like it's an alien thing. It's just not a common thing for us anymore, but it is not alien. We all get it. Yeah. And it's not just because we're Irish and these are our grandparents and we remember what that was like as children. It's nothing to do with that. It's people being true and just speaking the truth and speaking honestly and telling their stories and not hiding and everyone gets that. All you need is enough English to understand, and you feel the rest of it. And that's Kitty's great skill, that she can communicate directly to people. It often amazes me, because you think all of the things that go into making yourself understood. And you think that maybe words are the most important thing, but there's so much else that happens as well. And I think honesty and truth are maybe the key things, So I love creating spaces and chances for that to happen. Kitty was just a very good example of that. But oral history, that's what I do. I manage this project and I record people, but I don't do it. I'm not at all interested in nostalgia. I'm not at all interested in the good old days and
Frankie Court syndrome.
Actually, I read that book and I really liked it. But I liked the darkness in it and the humor. But anyway, it's. Yeah, so I really dislike nostalgia. I don't at all think that, everything was golden in the old days and now everybody's lost their soul. I don't for a second believe that. What I'm interested in recording older people is what they have to say about how they lived and what we can learn about how they lived, and even understand like pace is a big thing for me. Like I like talking to those people because I like to enter into an older, slower pace of life where a different kind of interaction with your environment was taking place, where it was necessarily slower because we didn't have any of the machinery that speeds things up, and we were maybe more dependent on farming lifestyles and weather and all that. And not just what that did in terms of being able to provide for yourself and grow food, all of that, but just what it did to your everyday life, like that you had to finish work when it got dark because you can't farm in the dark. You can feed animals in a shelter with the light of a lamp, but really in the winter by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's all over. And even in the winter, you don't actually have that much work to do because the sheep aren't lambing, the cows aren't calving, there's nothing growing. So you're indoors and the days are long and dark and the evenings are stretching ahead of you. So it's natural to have your neighbours ramble in and have a conversation around the fire. And what that did for your awareness of your community and your knowledge of your community and maybe your lack of knowledge of anything outside your community. I just like entering into that space and thinking about all of that. Because the life I live now, like I live on my own now, my children are grown and, they come and they go and all that. And my husband, Brian, died a couple of years ago. And I'm very self-sufficient, psychologically and emotionally. And I'm also very interested in reading film, podcasts and all that. So I can spend days and weeks on my own, endlessly entertained by what's going on in my head and what I'm consuming through these media. And like once upon a time, that life would not have been possible, and I reflect on what that's doing to me. Like, is it making me a less social being? Because I really only have to buy my groceries. I don't have to do anything else, So I also don't know how I got to this point.
But I suppose you're also someone who has a lot going on. So then that retreat is quite nice. I was finding this. My wife was away the last weekend, and I was home with the kids, and they're small enough that they go to bed early enough. So I had the evenings, and I was kind of like, normally everything is so busy that I'd be delighted to have the evening just in. And now I just noticed after 3 nights, I was a bit like, oh, it'd be lovely to go to a session or something. You know, I was kind of like realizing that in that quiet, because everything had calmed down for the first time in a long time, actually, for me, I was a bit like, oh yeah, and that's the balance. I was a bit annoyed at myself. I was like, sure, usually you love listening to podcasts and being self-sufficient. But at the end of the day, I suppose none of us fully are. But maybe you are. But I suppose part of that is as well that your life outside is very full.
Yeah, so I do like to retreat, but it's that eternal thing, isn't it? You crave the calm when you're in the middle of the fray, and then you get the calm and you're going, okay, when's my next fray?
Yeah. There's a bit of that. Yeah. Exactly.
You know, what you're talking about there with, and I really heard it with to go back, the interview with Kitty, you know, you're talking about the wisdom that these older people have and the way anyone can connect with it. It's not about them being Irish. It's not about them speaking English. And there is a wisdom. There's the wisdom of a life well lived. You know, if you've been farming for 60 years, you will have deep knowledge. But there's also that way that wisdom can lead to something even deeper, like even more universal. You know, archetypical might be the word I'd use. And I think that's, you know, I hear a lot of that in the Cuimhne van Clare stuff. And I remember when you interviewed Kitty, I think there was a lot of stuff happening with elections and geopolitics and things like this. And it was fascinating to listen to somebody in her late 80s.
Yes.
Late 80s, you know, the perspective these people have, the amount of ups and downs they've seen. And when we invited you on, I had an idea for a topic. If I was to choose a topic for you, I would have chosen voice, because I feel like that is really, that knowledge and that calm is encoded not in the words, but in the voice.
Yes.
And I was listening back to the biodiversity episode, and it opens with Thomas Barry, who I think has one of the great voices. And he is talking about when he used to be carrying the hay up, and when it had gone to seed, there'd be flocks of birds following him. He's like, and now they cut the hay too early, and there's no seed and there's no birds, and that's terrible.
Yeah.
And the way he delivers it goes straight to your heart.
Yeah. You know, actually, that would have been a really good topic. Maybe we'll go on that now for a bit. Because, yes, voice is the thing. And, you know, when you work in oral history, there is a certain prejudice against it, like, oh, it's oral history, it's not real history, you know, it's people just saying whatever they want, you know, as if history writers don't just write whatever they want, you know, or, you know, as if they don't have perspective and bias and all of that. But voice, but the one thing that keeps coming up about our archive is people say, it's great to have all of that perspective on history and heritage of County Clare, but what's really powerful is hearing those people's voices. And that's it, because everything else is interpretation. You know, and oral history has been used for that a lot. People go out and interview because they're researching a topic, and then they write their topic and they quote the voices. Yes. If you go to the Cuimhne van Clare archive, you can hear the voices. And not only, so you listen to the podcast, you're hearing the curated voices, and I'm the curator, so I'm bringing you what I think is electric. And, you know, curation has a very important role to play, but you could also go back into our archive and listen to everything that person has ever said, not edit it, because we don't have time to edit it. We try and take out the libelous stuff, you know, and then lob it in the archive so you can get the uninterpreted thing. And it is so powerful listening to people's voices. And on a kind of a practical level, the voice is encoding so much more than just the history and the story, because now they're encoding accent, dialect, language use. Like, I've sometimes given this example. We've a story in the archive that it's in that is it in the Biddy Early podcast? Francie Kennelly telling the story about the man who came from Milltown to see Biddy Early because his wife had been knocked down by the Síguithe. So Francie died a few years ago and he was 103. So he was born, let me get this right, in 1917 or something like that.
Wow, yeah.
And also a lot of those people that are of value when you interview them are valuable because they've been listening to people from an older time themselves. So Francie was getting stories from people who, you know, his father and grandfather who were born in the middle of the 19th century. So they're transmitting not just their own voice and their own stories, but inherited memories from much further back. And they're transmitting them in accents and dialects that are now disappearing because accents and dialects change all the time. Yep. This isn't more the nostalgia stuff. Like Clare people 20 years ago spoke differently than they speak now and will speak differently in another 20, 30 years again. And now you're jumping back 103 years and possibly 140 years. And that's all in Francie's voice. And in the way he expresses himself and phrases, like he says this thing. And then the man came back home and he went into his own yard and the wake was going on and there was terrible make way. Have you ever heard of that phrase, terrible make way? But you know exactly what it means, don't you?
Yeah.
So you're encountering these phrases all the time. When I first started to record, say, Lizzie Curtin in Milltown Malbay. Lizzie died about 15 or 20 years ago. So she'd probably also have been born in the very early 20th century. She was a wonderful tradition bearer. And I'd be interviewing her about people around Milltown Malbay. And she was talking about this man one day. And she said, oh, he's a great Irishan. Do you know what an Irishan is?
No.
Can you guess what it is?
Like,
okay. So you nearly need to know Irish from it, but it's somebody who is versed in Irish culture, an Irishan.
Yeah, that's
an
what
Irishan.
I was kind of thinking a good Irish. Yeah, that's funny.
But it comes from Gaeilgeoir. So, which is Gaeilgeoir now means somebody from English-speaking Ireland who goes to the Gaeltacht and learns Irish.
Yeah.
But then it was somebody like Mauricio Rojan, who was an expert in traditional culture and music. He was a great Irishan. And a lot of people up around Milltown and up into North Clare as well had a lot of Irish in their English when I was younger. And some of them still have, but it is disappearing. So around Milltown, when they're describing somebody who's lovely and affectionate, that they say, oh, he was very grover.
Yes.
You know, which
like
is loving or affectionate or whatever. Or, oh, she had awful charouse on him. Charouse means... it comes from Irish, so charouse or charavas, meaning bitterness, but it means, she was down on him, she didn't like him, she had it in for him. You know, so like all these phrases, and me being from East Clare, I wasn't familiar with these, because as you move east in the county, you get less Irish in the English. Anyway, all of that is in the archive now. So there's like the stories that people tell, but there's history locked into their voices as well. And we didn't fully get that when we started, but now we have stories going back 15, 20, 30 years in the archive, and we can hear it now. We can hear how those voices are changing.
Yeah. And one thing I think for me is very powerful, and I hear it when I hear Thomas Barry speak. I heard it in your voice at the Shanakiha event when you were talking about the magic of Biddy Early, your relationship with her through interviewing people and the choice you make about how to engage with the stories about Biddy Early. I won't do it justice, but in the moment I found it very moving, is that this is not about nostalgia. This is not about, these accents will be lost, if we don't preserve them. There is information, knowledge, guidance, passion, emotion in those voices that we desperately need right now, that can guide us, that can soothe us and bring us forward from where we are into the future. I think they're of tremendous practical value, and I think people are missing them and don't even know that they're missing them. And I think part of that is when they hear the Cuimhne von Clare stuff, one of the reasons they're connecting is that they're not connecting, they're reconnecting with something they might have lost.
Because what you connect, when you have that moment of connection, I think on any level, whether it's with great art or great conversation or listening to an archive, it's because you're recognizing yourself. You're seeing yourself. You're hearing the darkness echoing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that you are Biddy Early and you're a healer or anything, but those stories connect you to the essence of something, and you might not be able to describe what the essence is, but you recognize it, you know, and they're antidotes to all the stuff around us, like, you know, I must impress this person, I must impress that person, I must get the next grant, I must do this big project, I must whatever, write this article, I must be seen to be earning whatever, you know. It's an antidote, isn't it? And it connects you back to what's true, and gives you something that can guide you through the rest of it.
100%. And I think that's so powerful what you're saying there about voice, because it does lead us to the deeper truth of us all. I'm just thinking when I was listening to the both of you that a thing that I sometimes, as a proper blow-in, not someone who is just like I think it's what the story was before, that I met a lovely farmer, must be late 80s as well or something, and I was walking up Clifton, the hill by where we live, and he was saying, "Oh, where are you from?" and blah blah, and he was like, "Well, I was born in Corfin, so I'm a bit of a blow-in myself as well," you know, which I thought was lovely. It was lovely, yeah. Like, exactly. Thank you for contextualizing it. Yeah, exactly. 5 minutes down the road, and I thought like there's some beautiful wisdom in that as well. But I think sometimes what I come up against, or what, like we when we have guests, we talk about what's alive in them, but then that also reflects to what's alive in ourselves, and what's alive in me at the moment a bit, I think, is that I feel I've such a beautiful and meaningful life here, but I always keep coming up against this boundary of, well, but I am not Irish. I don't have that. I'd love to learn Irish, all that stuff. I feel like Irish culture actually allows you as an outsider to connect into that deeper truth quite beautifully. But then sometimes it's a sadness as well then, that I'm like, oh, but will I always be outside looking in? And actually I don't think that's true. But sometimes, and when you were saying stuff, I was thinking like, yeah, that's also stuff. Like national identity, it's a powerful and a beautiful way to connect to the core, but it can also create separation, as we know. But then voice, this thing keeps coming back to me. I haven't thought about it for years, but there was an RTE radio program I listened to where there was Michael Harding, the poet, and it was like, I think RTE Arena or something, or some cultural show, and he just comes in with something. I'll have to look it up because it's such a beautiful clip, but he just comes in, "I looked at her and I loved her." And it's like, if you wrote that down, that means fuck all. But when you listen to that on the radio, you go, Jesus Christ, that's gone straight into my heart, because he delivers it so beautifully. And that's such a communal thing. And I suppose because we've had written text for a long time now, which means that we can, like, when you read like Rumi or something like that, you're like, oh my God, this is someone in, would that be now Saudi Arabia or somewhere?
Persia, I think.
Persia, yeah.
I think.
Yeah, but somewhere that part of the world, who was saying these things that are 100% applicable right now, but you never get his voice, you never get his character. Like, you get the wisdom, and because the words are so good.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you need to hear the voice.
Yes. Well, it's great when you can. Can I say something about the outsider-insider thing?
Please.
So, I would just embrace it, like, enjoy it. And on that being a blow-in, like, I'm a blow-in from scarif to fecal. And we can all laugh at that, but in some ways, that's as big a change. That's a bigger change to make than the Netherlands to Ireland, because as Irish people, we expect people from other cultures to come in. Nobody in Fecal expects someone from Scariff to move there. And nobody in Scariff forgives a Scariff person for moving there, because like there's massive rivalry between those two parishes to a level of bitterness, you know. And like I made a kind of an intellectual / emotional decision to move. So so I'm from Scariff, born and raised. Got educated elsewhere, lived elsewhere. Travelled around a bit and came back to Galway, and myself and Brian lived in Galway for 10 years, and then I really wanted to move back to Clare. But I didn't want to move back to Scariff. Oh God, this is in a podcast forever now. So Fecal is full of music, and music was very important to me. So I wanted to move to Fecal. And we did. And like, music became the centre of our lives, and we had kids and they play music and all of that kind of thing. But like for a lot of my friends in Scariff, they're going like, what did you just do? You know? And genuinely, I would say very, very few of my friends from down the road in Scariff have ever come to my house in Fecal. Like all sorts of other people come, but not my Scariff friends. I have to go down to Scariff to visit them. and the really interesting thing is so we moved to Fecal, the kids were very small. So they were in school, they were playing hurling, and we were very connected in. But now they're finished. We don't go to mass, we're not religious. So there's no school, there's no church, there's no GAA to connect me in. And, you know, while I absolutely love county hurling and all that, I don't follow all the local games. And now I'm living in Fecal, and I don't have any of the three big things that connect me. I do have music, but like the music community in Fecal is a very small subset of the overall thing. And now I'm realising, actually, the place where I can go where people really know me is Scariff. You know, that's actually my home, and I am an outsider here. This sounds ridiculous, but hear me out.
It's so true.
You know, but I am an outsider in Fecal, and that's okay. I actually like being an outsider. I like being, because people, just because you're an outsider doesn't mean people don't accept you. They can completely accept you. But like, don't pretend you're something you're not. As in, for me, don't pretend I was bred, born and reared in Fecal and that I know everything about Fecal hurling when I clearly don't. So I embrace my outsiderness, and that gives me permission to say and do things and not have to account for myself in ways that other parish people would have to account for themselves. Now, none of this is really important, but, you know, it just... These are things I think about, and I am amazed that when I go down to Scariff, which is 9 miles away, and like none of my family live there anymore. My family home is sold and it's a totally different place now. And I still feel this is me, this is who I am, this is where I'm from. You know, and it's a place that is not of interest to anybody really unless you're living in it, you know, whereas somewhere like Doolin or Lahinch, everyone's attracted, you know, because that's the coast or whatever. But you have to feel it to understand places like Scariff and Fecal and all that. So I enjoy my status as outsider, insider. And the other thing that will set you apart, and this is probably true for the two of you as well, is your desire and ability to interpret what's going on around you and to talk about it rather than just living it. You know, that does make you an outsider too, you know. So yeah, let's just be outsiders and
No, but
embrace
I
it.
think you're dead right, and that's beautiful. And thank you for comforting me. But it's I think that's 100% true. And people have said it to me quite a few times that like, oh, but you're bringing something different as an outsider. And I had a really funny conversation with a Dutch lady who lives nearby, and she's been cycling all around. And obviously, Dutch are great for the cycling, and we've just like with the small kids, we're like, can't be cycling here. Far too dangerous, you know. And she's like, yeah, but it's ridiculous that people don't cycle here. And I'm going to try and bring that in. And she's just like, she's cycling and she's communicating really clearly with people. She's like, right, I'll tell them to wait. And then I tell them now they can go because there's a bit of space, you know. And she said, and people actually really appreciate it. And I've noticed that a lot of times where people are like, oh, we like this about your outsiderness or that about your outsiderness. I suppose it can just sometimes clue into... I think belonging can be a big sense. And when I think back of the village I was reared, it doesn't feel like a big belonging. I do feel more belonging here, I suppose. I do. So but then...
Is Dutch society not very strong, not very village-based as well, no? I've no experience except through films.
It is rurally a bit, but I'd say the roots don't go as deep. It's quite a centralized country. Okay. You know, so there are definitely like people, I know villages where it's like, yeah, there is a strong village identity, but the sense of community has been weakened there a good bit, I would say. Okay. I sometimes say like and obviously I haven't lived in all these places, but like a friend of ours, Joe Hendel, was talking about that in America now it's very insular. It's very like you listen to that type of radio, you have those types of colleagues, you go into the car, you listen to those kind of podcasts, or you're on another side of that. And what he really likes about living here, he's moved here as well, he loves that in the pub everyone is there from all ages and everyone has to kind of get along to a certain extent.
That's true of a geographical community. Yeah. You have to compromise and get along.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a lot of that here, and I would know a lot more about, like in the Netherlands, I always say you have your friends and family and strangers, and then maybe colleagues is like a subset that's in between there somewhere. Whereas here, we know so many people in the community that we all know and that we have some relation with, and some of them you really wouldn't get on with, you know, but you know them and you see them all the time. Whereas in the Netherlands, you just wouldn't see them. You know, it's just like, oh yeah, we're not hanging out with those people. You know what I mean? And I think that's a real strength of here.
It's the value of the public house.
Yes.
And, you know, one of the Irish terms for church is teach an phobal, which is a public house as well. And it is one thing that we have here, which is a neutral space where people can come together. And I remember when I first started traveling to continental Europe, and I realized, say, in Germany and in France, that people's social lives were with their family and their close friends. And I remember being so shocked. And I was going like, how do you meet people?
Yeah.
But they don't. Or they may maybe do through work or whatever. But we have, in Ireland, we have this feckin' hunger to know people and to have conversations and to be with them. Talking shite most of the time, but you know, that has a function.
And you feel it internationally. Like I'm quite an introvert, and I get over-socialed very quickly. I will hit Thursday and go, I've seen too many people this week, I'm closing the shutters. But then you travel internationally and then realise that an Irish introvert is still a lot more social
than a German introvert.
When you're talking about, first of all, I want to go back a tiny bit. When you're talking about fecal and scarf, I'm from Ballyhaig. I get it.
Do you? Great.
Nobody leaves Ballyhaig. Somebody pointed this out to me, and I was like, if a Ballyhaig person and somebody from another parish get married, they move to Ballyhaig. There's no option. And you're just like, are we just poaching from all these other different parishes? But it's really true that little... I think it's slightly a geographical thing as well. Ballyhaig is a seaside village on a peninsula, which basically means that it just has a village to the north and a village to the south.
Also, why would you move inland when you could be in Ballyhaig?
Exactly. And it is really funny for me that I went to secondary school then in Tralee, and then I studied in Hangzhou in China. I feel very little connection to Tralee. Now, it's very interesting. Those are my teenage years and stuff, and like a lot happened, and I made a lot of friends, but I go back to Tralee, and I'm like, I don't really feel a sense of belonging here. I feel more belonging in Hangzhou. I go to, and I haven't lived there since 2012, but I was running into people on the street in a city of 8 million people. People heard I was in town, and my phone was blowing up, and this was back in 2019, but I was like, my God, I actually feel more at home here. And then when I go back to Ballyhaig, it's another very different type of being at home, because I'm like, I went off and I saw the world, and I'm different now. And they're like, nah, you're still Patsy and Geraldine's son. I remember when you got,
Yeah.
And I do actually feel a sense of belonging in Ballyhaig, in that like my people are there, my bones are there.
You don't have to explain yourself there.
You don't have to explain
and
yourself.
And we all know that one. And I do also know that one, even if I don't feel that sense of belonging. And sometimes it can be frustrating as well. But even when we go back to the Netherlands, I'm always like, I know exactly what is meant. Like when I say a thing, even though I think
that's a kind of belonging.
Yeah, that is a kind, like you can say a thing. Whereas here, even with a friend who's as close as Anthony is to me, which is very close, I would say, but it's uncomfortable. I know, it's fine. Sit in it. You're grand.
I'll edit it out.
Yeah. Oh, you should have seen him on the wedding day. Oh, it's great crack. Anyway, sorry, the discomfort. But
it was a lot.
But there is sometimes I will have to go, oh no, I don't mean it like that. I mean it like this. So it's that kind of thing. And like I say, I hope this doesn't say, because a lot of people listening would know me personally. Like I love how I'm accepted here, 100%. Like our sessions are really popular. People ask me to play at their weddings, and people like coming on our podcast. So I feel like, and it's a very rich and beautiful life. So I'm not saying that, but it's more to what you're speaking to. It's like, when I say to a Dutch person, I say this or that, and I know exactly how that gets in the door. And sometimes I would even say to you, we would say it like this, and what that means is this,
And sometimes, like, you tell me a Dutch phrase, and I'm like, why don't we have that in Irish or English? That's a great phrase.
Yeah, and it's funny, the communal aspect between languages as well, because when we had Ronan O'Snuddy here, he was talking about ridder, about a knight, and that's just like a Dutch word is ridder. So it's like, it is funny how in another way it's all connected, and I do think that the strength of Irish culture is that it does point to something true and communal, and I think that's why people love it so much. And it does allow you to participate. It is like, if you really participate in it, like I hope I am doing, people will really go, great, you are part of our social life, our social circle. Well, as I think, if you have a more insular society like the Netherlands would be quite hard to find a place where you can join in, you know, and
unless
that makes
you married someone over there.
And it does happen. And there's funny back and forth then as well, where all the Dutch football players, whatever country they're, or like whatever their ethnicity is, they all sound slightly Moroccan now. Because that is the accent that is in the street football games.
Of the football team.
So it's really funny. So you could look as white as me, as Dutch as me, Dutch as cheese, and you could sound like a little bit Moroccan in your Dutch, which is and that's kind of cool in a way as well. That there's an exchange that way.
And that's back to the voice again.
And it's back to the voice again. And oh God.
And the culture of that space, the football space. Yeah,
exactly.
Amazing.
But can I get back to one thing you said at the very start, Paula, that I'm interested to hear? You were saying about Irish expression, or maybe expression in Clare, that there is all this musical expression. And I do think here we have it as good as anywhere in the country. It's such fertile soil. Would you say, but not in a different way? What do you mean by that?
Oh, yeah, that Irish people are very expressive in some ways and not at all in other ways. Yeah, I think that we keep our emotions very tight and our real feelings about anything very tight. There's a kind of a self-protective layer there. There is, and where does that come from, I suppose? Like I found when I was having children, I was having babies, there was a very kind of rigid set of expectations, you know, oh, don't be making a fuss, you know, just get on with it. Women have done it for millennia, you know, whereas I was very kind of alternative about it, and I wanted to, like, I barely worked for money during my pregnancies. You know, I really focused on it. I took loads of time with my kids after they were born. My children were born at home with one of the few home birth midwives that was available. Brilliant. I think there were 2 in the west of Ireland at the time, one based in Gort and one further up in Moycullen. And whether you were from Clare, Limerick, Tipperary, Galway or Mayo, you were dependent on one of those women. So I lived in this very different space when I was pregnant and having children. And I knew lots of women in that space, but outside of it, like all my other contemporaries who were having babies at the time were like, I have my consultant, I'm going to the hospital, I'm doing this. And it was like, we actually didn't have conversations about what I think was the most profound thing I've ever done in my life, which is to give birth to a child. I didn't discuss that with any of my school friends because I think we felt we'd be judging each other. They judging me for doing stupid things like trying to have babies at home, and me them for being so fucked up and stuck in this conventional health system that you would debase the most profound experience in your life by letting, you know, mechanics look after it for you. So there is this kind of don't step outside the boundaries thing in a lot of Irish society, you know, behave in this particular way. At least that's what I found. And you see it around, I think you still see it. I don't know how you feel about it, Anthony, but I do still think Irish people protect their emotions very carefully and don't express them. And like we all have friends who do, of course, but just in a general sort of way. And I think, well, I don't know what I think. I think that some of that comes from being a colonized country where someone else is in charge and has the potential to do serious damage to you if you don't conform to what's expected. And I think that we have several centuries of experience of conforming to other bosses. Yeah. And I think we still suffer from that. And interestingly, and that's not pop psychology, you know, there's now research done, you know, showing that trauma, generational trauma and trauma through centuries is actually gets written into your DNA. 100%. So I think that's partly why we are a little bit emotionally constipated. Anthony, do you...
100%.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you brought up colonization, because colonized people tend to have like a countrywide inferiority complex, and even when they gain independence, they still look to the colonizer or whoever has stepped into the role of the boss. I think you see that with the industrialized medical system as well. Like Irish people love a doctor.
Love a fucking consultant.
Yeah, you know.
He's the best man in his field.
Yes. What was he like? He saw me for 45 seconds, didn't remember my name, and charged me €200. He was
ignorant
fantastic.
as a pig, but he'd be there if you needed him.
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently,
he'd
be
handsome,
there if you needed him.
You know. And I think that's what I'm interested in talking about. Is you said you even used the word outside when you were talking about your approach to your birth, and I think the role of that's another place where the role of the outsider is important, in that Irish people do conform. Irish people are quite insular. We are actually a very liberal country when you talk to individuals, but we're quite a conservative country when you look at us as a nation. It's very interesting. We are
Good
conformist,
point.
You know.
It's so true, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think that's why we need outsiders. And we got John Moriarty, the hut on the edge of the village. We need weirdos. We need Biddy Early. We need people that break the system. We need artists. We need Patrick Kavanagh, who's able to say the things, John B. Keane, who's able to say the things that we are not actually capable of saying, because we have this survivalist defense mechanism, which means that we stone face shit. We don't let people know how hurt we are. We don't let people know how embarrassed we are.
Because this could be really dangerous if I let this out.
Yeah. And I remember, during the project, we were collecting stories, and Mancon McGann told a story about this magical cow that nourished the whole community, and this stranger came in and tricked the community and killed the cow, basically. And then Edwina Guckian, as part of the same series, told a story about a woman who was taken by the fairies and a changeling left in her place. And the only person that could save her, that held the cure, was a rambling man. This is a real story her grandmother told her, and apparently this rambling man, there was a cup in the house that was just for the rambling man, the stranger. And a rambling man would be somebody who kind of didn't really live anywhere, just went from house to house. You'd make him a bit of dinner, he'd tell you the gossip from the neighbouring communities, and he passed on a bit of information that was actually able to save the young girl. So there are the two views of the outsider. In our little communities, the outsider can be somebody who comes in and shakes things up in a very destructive way. Things were fine until you brought in these new ideas. Or it can be somebody that's like, oh my God, our little community doesn't actually have, we're so tight, we haven't innovated. Now that we have a new problem, we need something from outside to come in and to actually help us gain a bit of perspective on it.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, Irish people will always will have this back and forth with outsiders where we know we need these different people, these expressive people, these destructive innovators, but we're also suspicious of them.
Well, I don't know that any of that is conscious, though.
No, I wouldn't say it is.
And I also don't think that every outsider is an innovator or a free thinker or whatever. I think that also comes from within, I don't know if we can even say the native community, but you know what I'm trying to say. So I think what you've described is true, but I don't think it's a plan. I don't think people really think about it or bring it about or understand it consciously. It just is. I thought of something. I heard a fantastic description once about the difference between the Dutch and the Irish. And let me see if I can remember this, because it was wonderful. And it was about our private morality and our public morality. And it made the difference between the religion. So a lot of Dutch people were Calvinist originally, and a lot of Irish people Catholic originally. And I think in Ireland, the Catholicism thing is very bound with the colonization. So the invaded, oppressed people were Catholics, the invaders were Protestants, and so on. But so our experience is like, and you said it there, Anthony, privately we're one way, publicly we're another way. So in Ireland, it's like privately, do whatever you want, get on with it. Nobody's going to bother you. But publicly, you must be seen to be towing the line. So you can be married, you can be having affairs, that's fine. You can have a second family that you don't recognize, that's fine. But you must be going to mass, and you must be seen with your wife, and you must be sending your children to the right school, all this kind of thing. And the Dutch then, they're saying, because of the Calvinism, your public morality must be your private morality. You must lead the same life, the same internal life as you're professing publicly. And you know, there can't be a clash there. You must bring those two closer together. So they gave the example that in the Netherlands, if 16-year-olds are having sex and girls are getting pregnant, then the Dutch will bring down the age of consent to 16 so that the public morality matches the private morality. Or if people are smoking dope, in reality, they'll change the laws to make that legal. So it was legal to smoke cannabis, wasn't it, in the Netherlands long before. Is it legal here? I'm not sure. Anyway,
it's condoned. I think,
it's changing around the world. Anyway, it's being made legal in various places. But like the Netherlands was way ahead, because it's like, if this is what is happening, then this is what we must express publicly. Whereas we go, let's do whatever we want to do. just don't let the bosses know.
Yes, yes.
I think there's definitely truth to that. Now, the south of the Netherlands would be Catholic, so my family would be from a Catholic, or my mother's family anyway, very close to. But I think there's truth to that. Like even with prostitution, you know, it was like, if we're gonna have prostitution anyway, it will be taxed. You know, which is such a Dutch thing. And now, obviously, it's not the case that there be no morality. Like, there is also prescriptive morality, of course.
Yeah.
But it is another thing that, as an outsider, you can see the difference. Where, like, because you say it's not conscious. So you both living here, I look back over there, going, oh, actually, that's a thing that I always thought was very normal, but here is dealt with very differently. And then here, there's lots of stuff where I'm like, oh, these guys think this is all normal, but actually. And a very pertinent example of that is that people would always say to me, like, oh, you're being far too emotionally honest. We're not drunk enough for that yet, or something, you know, like, but then also people say, I'm glad you're doing that, or I'm glad when you tell me a thing, I actually know it's what you mean.
Yeah.
Rather than, and that is something that sometimes makes me insecure here, where I'm like, do you want a cup of tea? And like, no. And I'm like, ugh. I go, okay, you're not getting tea if you don't say yes. Yeah. So just know that, and then don't be angry with me, you know. And there's something nice. So it is free. It's breaking something up in its way. But I really noticed it with the COVID as well, where you know, we're not going into whatever you think of all that happened. But I think we've expressed enough of that. But in the Netherlands, say that the groups of people who thought it was very bad and authoritarian what was happening, which I would probably be counted among them, in the Netherlands they'd be going to the streets and I know there was some of that here, but it was definitely not covered on the news as well. And whereas here I found, actually a lot of people do disagree with this, but they just won't tell you straight away. And only as I got to know people more and more, they'd be like, yeah, no, it's all nonsense. But like, so I think there's some real truth to what you're saying, that there's a real public morality and a private morality.
Yeah.
And but in a way, I do believe the value of the Irish way of doing that is that it allows a bit more space in community. Like, there were things, for instance, with the COVID, where someone be like, yeah, I don't agree with what that person is doing, but he is my neighbor. So I do want to respect that. That is the upside of it. Whereas with the Dutch, it'd be like, well, there's this famous expression. It's like, I'm only telling the truth. Which just means, like, I can say whatever horrendous thing to you. You know, it's quite an aggressive thing. So that's the problem with that. The upside, and I do like to look at, I think we both do, is actually, it's like, I like to look at things with, this is the good and this is the bad, instead of going, that's good or that's bad. Like, this allows for more community and space in community and more respect to other people's opinions.
It's less reactive.
But it's less reactive, but I also believe it is good to be a similar person in all the parts of your life. We're all going to be a little different as a parent than as an employee of Clare FM or in a podcast or as a Chinese medicine practitioner. We're always going to be slightly different to the occasion, but it's good if it can be quite consistent. I do believe that as well. That's the upside of it. So yeah, no, that was a very long way of saying I think you might be onto something there, Paula.
That thing of I'm only telling the truth, that's fantastic, because I experienced that first in Germany, you know, which is probably the first country I travelled to and lived in any serious way when I was around 19 or something. And they would just like say stuff straight out, and you'd be going, oh my God. Like, and you would be in a discussion of how different Germans are to Irish. We'll say the Irish might be accused of being dishonest or hiding their emotions, whatever. But I actually don't think that's what's happening. I just think our codes are different. Yeah. And like, if between Irish people, if somebody says something outrageous and the other person in the conversation goes, that's not accession. I'm not agreeing. Yeah. I'm just deciding not to blow this thing up. Yeah. And other Irish people in the room around me will understand that.
Yeah, just leaving it.
And then afterwards you go, Jesus Christ, did you hear? Whereas maybe people from other cultures will go, well, I disagree with that, and then the argy-bargy starts or whatever. And we kind of go, oh, where does that get anyone? You know, so you just need to understand the codes. I think a lot of our codes are non-verbal.
And it probably comes from small community living, because you don't want to be too quick to fall out with your next door neighbour who you're going to be seeing every day for the next 30 years.
As I say, you can live with that family, but you can't live without neighbours.
Mm-hmm. It's very true.
I find that so true. Mm-hmm. So true. Like, so there's, you know, somebody does something next door and you go, oh, the bastard just chopped down 8 trees. And you go, but I'll say nothing. You know, and maybe that's not good. And you know, in the long run, it might not be good, but it's like, oh, I want to continue living here for another 30 years, you know. So
it does give you the space also to take some time over that decision rather than straight away. Because it's true, I do have that more where if someone says something, I'm like, I'm going to have to say something, you know. But even, especially now with stuff like politics, I actually don't feel that need anymore. So I'm also adapting to living here, and I actually like some parts of it where I will hear someone say something and I'm like, yeah, I think that's a little ignorant, but also this is not the setting to have a 3-hour conversation about that, nor do I think it will do anyone any good. So it is there is a real exchange when you move to a different place.
But there's also, I think at some stage you do need to use your voice.
It's both.
As well.
It's
and
both.
I think that's maybe where the Irish thing can be a bit restrictive or something like that, where you're using the it'll be grand, leave them off for everything. But actually it's not about leaving it off for everything. It's about not reacting to everything. But like, as Irish people, obviously we do have a history of creating a fuss.
A bit of a fuss.
Well, it's called resistance, which is a little bit different from creating a fuss.
Absolutely,
but
yes.
And you know where I think that the Irish way is dangerous? Like, do you remember, it was in the last year where a busload of migrants were brought down to Magana House in Inch?
Yes.
And the Magana House was being used to house migrants. And they were met by a self-appointed group of, I'll call them vigilantes, I don't know any of them, carrying baseball bats, I was told, and, you know, who went on that bus and asked to see people's identity. Like, they had no right whatsoever to do that. And I'm sure we have laws preventing that, and I'm sure that those people probably should have been disciplined by the guards, but probably weren't, because it's like, let's not make things worse than they are. But things are as bad as they can get for that busload of men and women and children. So it's like, when we say don't make things worse than they are, it's like, don't make things worse than they are for us, who are not affected at all.
Yes.
But these people are in the worst moment of their lives, and they've just come to a country of safety, they think, and now they're being met by people who have no authority, no professional role, who are going to police their community in this way. And the more we let that happen, and we have been letting that happen a lot, including not prosecuting people who burn down buildings that are supposed to house migrants. And all the migrant representative groups in Ireland have been saying to the guards and the government and anyone who will listen, this is not the way to do this. You must challenge people who act illegally like this. But we're going, it's just because we're not really racist and we don't want to bring this up and maybe admit that we are racist. Let's just keep it nice and handy. And I find that terrifying and so dangerous for us as a country.
There's that thing about let's not make a fuss, but sometimes what you're doing there is just putting the burden on someone else. Yeah. You know, like
people who can't lift any more of a burden, you know, than they have. So yeah, that does bother me. That big Irish thing of let's, you know, and when you bring up something like, you know, genocide or Palestine, it's like, it's too big to think about, you know. Yet, you know, everybody knows that murdering people is wrong. Everybody knows that genocide is wrong. So why are there so few people actually willing to jump up and down about it? You know, it is that kind of politics in Ireland, even though, you know, life is intensely political, but politics in Ireland has always been seen as a very dangerous game, you know.
Probably because it was.
Historically,
It was.
yeah.
Yeah. But now we're not the downtrodden anymore. You know, we're a century into independence, and we have matured through that century. And we are now white, Western and privileged, albeit with a colonial past which still affects the present. But we now have way more in common with our European colonial neighbours than we are different, do you know? And I think we do need to step up, and we do need to cry halt. And I don't know that we're doing it. We, as a country, we have still got a great reputation. We'll say in the context of the Palestinian genocide, we have a reputation for being on the side of the Palestinians and, you know, doing better than most other European countries. But actually, what are we doing? You know, it's 19, 20 months into this, and people are being murdered wholesale, and we're allowing it to happen. You know?
I wonder is, you know, because historically, politically, we had people like Frank Aiken championing the causes of Tibet and you know, Middle Eastern causes and so on, like our former Secretary of State. And you know, in the decades after we gained our independence, we were really championing the causes of oppressed countries around the world. And now I wonder I'm starting to see this in a lot of like systems and hierarchies. There seems to be perhaps a disconnect between the people at the top of these hierarchies, policymakers, people in positions of political power, and the people that are supporting them, which I find really strange. You know, in the last local elections, like so many people I talk to around here are left-wing, liberal, and then just Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil sweep the board, you know. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if the people at the top are not reflecting the voices of the masses, because you definitely see that there is activism. There are people out there so devoted to the Palestinian cause on the ground level.
Well, if you go back to the elections, or say the recent national election, I think, like, out of 4 seats in County Clare, 3 went to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and 1 went to Sinn Féin, which you could say is left-wing. So I think that's where a lot of the left-wing vote went to, and those are probably the quarter of the population of County Clare that you're speaking to. So it's not that there's a disconnect. I think everybody talks to their own community, and you're talking to the people who were voting left-wing, and that was actually represented. It's probably 20-25%, which is not bad, actually. You know, it's not great, but it's not bad. But I don't think, I don't know that there's a disconnect. We are, generally speaking, we vote conservatively. I think, though, that we allow ourselves to think that this is way more complex and complicated than it actually is. We, as a Western developed democracy, there is this kind of silent agreement that business and trade are the most important things of all to keep prosperity going. So we put those up top, and anything that threatens that, such as standing up for people who are the victims of a genocide, if that actually threatens your alliances, like with continental Europe through the EU, or I heard the other day that we have, is it €2.5 billion worth of trade with Israel. Yeah. So anything that threatens that, we won't go that far. So what we're doing is a bit like the public-private morality thing we were talking about. Yep. We're on the street protesting. but the trade continues, and the traffic through Shannon Airport continues.
Yeah, that
particularly
one is-
galling.
That
Yes.
one I find quite unbelievable, actually. That's still.
Do you know what I do think, though, that for a County Clare person to go down to Shannon Airport and to protest there is a very, very, very hard thing to do, because Shannon Airport has been the key to any economic prosperity that we've had in the county right through the 20th century. So to stand up and say anything that is going to, and like Shannon Airport is alive now because of the American business coming through it
Oh, yeah,
on
that
those
was always
military
the-
planes.
So Shannon Airport has American military planes coming through, refueling.
Yeah, there's very few really regular commercial flights going in and out of the airport. There are some, but not compared to Dublin or London or Belfast or So it's a really, like, if I go down, and I will do this because I've decided after my week in America last week, I need to do this. But it's a big feckin' thing for me to do, is to go down and stand outside the symbol of economic development and prosperity in my beautiful county and say, I would rather shut this down than have it do what it's doing. But if I'm going to be Dutch and make my public morality match my private morality, isn't that what I have to do? But so few people are doing it.
I think what everything you've said and the point you're making now, what it's really making me think about is that there needs to be really more detail in conversation. Because in a way, you'd want to be able to go, I am protesting not just Shannon Airport in general, I am protesting that it's being used for this horrible cause. But I think what has always happened do they call it, I did political science a long time ago, I think they called it like pork labeling or something, and in America they would quite often tie bills to something else.
Oh, yes.
And so something is called the Freedom Act, but actually it's doing horrible things, or it's like it's sending some money to children's hospitals, but then also it's funding wars, and I think we need to be able to have a higher level conversation. Even the example you gave of the migrants, I 100% agree with you, literally 100%. But I also think that actually it's not only those people need to be punished for their vigilantism, but we should also as a society be grown up enough to go, why are those people doing that? And that we can have those two. There was a whole kerfuffle with, there's this guy, Garen Noon, he's like a funny TikToker, who I think he seems to me like a really genuinely lovely guy. And he said something to the effect of, we might have to have a conversation about immigration. I think people are very welcome, or blah, blah. He said something really vanilla, And he got so much trouble for it. And that, for me, is where the issue starts. Is that if you cannot even discuss things, then people are going to go, oh, Paula, are you not in favour of Shannon Airport? Are you against Clare's? And it's like, no, not at all. But can we have a little bit of nuance here? I am very much against what is happening in Palestine. I'm very much against our,
culpability.
The culpability or the fact that we in some way add to this horror, but then also have such a nuanced discussion that people can't pick on you for that. And I think that is sometimes the problem with the public morality. I think you're making an excellent point, I'm saying it again in a very long-winded way. You're making an excellent point because it's a public morality thing where it's like, no, you can only be shown to do this or that. It's like, no, actually, I want this of that and I want this of that. And I want those to be, and I think we speak to this a lot, where you want nuance and you want space to discuss things. But the problem is that, and I do think politicians are particularly guilty of this, they love going, oh, you have a problem with that, so you have a problem with this. Because it's a very easy way of shutting people down.
It's, I think, the Irish way of non-reactivity, of like when somebody says something outrageous, not to immediately react, but to sit with it, I think is really valuable.
Yeah.
And I think nuance is really valuable. And I hope, but I think where nuance can get funny is where it becomes centrism or both sidism.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference being able to sit in the grey and be like, okay, there's two sides to this, but also go, but 99% of the fault is on one of these sides. And I think
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about two sides.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about, oh, those people have a point as well. I'm talking about, can you please hear what I'm actually saying? Like in Paula's case, I'm not saying I'm against economic prosperity. I am saying I'm against those flights happening through Shannon Airport. You know what I mean? So it's not both siding. It's actually being specific about what you're standing for, because the unspecificity makes it really hard to stand for something. Sorry, Paula.
No, I was just going to say most people just don't listen to each other.
Yeah.
And most people have made up their minds about stuff at a very, very, very young age. And most people don't change as they grow older. And that's why we need laws. You know, this is not about convincing people not to murder others.
That's true.
This is about making laws that we're willing to keep. It's
Or even
why,
just enforcing the laws that are already there.
It's why we founded the United Nations, to keep that balance between Western powers, so nobody could ever, you know, have that kind of war again. And now the work that was done in creating the United Nations and the international legislation that was brought in to keep that international peace is being completely ignored.
Yeah.
And we're sanctioning that instead of saying, no, I'm sorry, but we have to keep this. We have to keep these laws. And that's what's so terrifying to me, that all the work that went into 20th century peace building and all the legislation that we have and the conventions and the conventions that recognize a people's right to resist, because we actually have international legislation and agreements that recognize that if your country is invaded and you resist violently, we understand that. That all sits in the statute books, but we're swayed by the current megalomaniacs that are actually leading the world. And we go, but, and we arrive at a situation where we can see that a people who have been attacked for the last 80 years consistently, and the most militarized country in the world, that we see them somehow as being on a par. You know, we have allowed ourselves to view this, oh, well, you know, it's complicated. There's one side and there's the other side. No, actually, it's really simple. And Irish people in their gut do actually understand that. But we somehow manage to paralyze ourselves into so much non-activity that this continues. Jesus, like Rwanda was only 30 years ago. We've learnt nothing.
Yeah.
Right, I'll get off the soapbox now.
No, not at all. But it also, to me, it also shows just the corruption of systems, because there are laws, and I would say that not all those laws are good, but these ones are pretty clear, and they're just not being enforced. So that shows you that there is a different intention in that system. And I do believe what you were speaking to, Anthony, that there is a disconnect between what actually people want and what Irish government might be doing, or what international governments might be doing.
I've got to be honest, I'm sat here and I am feeling really, really, I'll be honest, I'm feeling really hopeless, you know, because I think there's tremendous truth to what you're saying, Paula, you know, and I think what me and Bart are trying to create here is a space where we like to... I think basically I live my life thinking that connecting with things like land and myth and story and people can awaken something good in human beings that is a bit of a counter to what is going on in Palestine, in Ukraine, in North Korea, you know, what is being threatened to Taiwan, which is a place very, very close to my heart, you know, and as we know with geopolitics, if one thing kicks off, you know, so, and I think I have to just believe that, and I don't like to believe that people need laws. at a heart, I believe in Munta, in Mencius, in you know, like community anarchism. I believe that like I believe that people can be inherently good. I don't believe they are, but I believe that they can be, and that there is things we can do to connect ourselves to other people. But demonstrably, that's not happening. You know?
Well, you see, nobody would disagree with you that those are good things to, you know, set your sail towards. But we need rules for acting in emergency situations as well, because people are good and they're bad, or people are, or people are traumatized,
or they're wounded.
Like there's no doubt that the situation in Israel now is born out of absolute mid-century trauma and what was done to the Jewish people by Europeans in the middle of the 20th century. There's no doubt that it comes out of that. But we can't spend our time understanding that. Like, we have to stop the crimes that are now being committed. Like, rapists are probably traumatized men, mostly.
But it has to stop.
Murderers are probably traumatized human beings. But first you stop what's happening, and then you try deal with the rest of it, you know.
Figure out the cause.
And, you know, it's part of our privilege as Westerners living in a peaceful society that we can talk around this for as long as we want. But in the meantime, you know, I know a family who came out of Palestine in January 24, and they left the grandmother behind. And I said, why was that? And they said, because she wouldn't have survived what we had to do to get out. She just wouldn't have. And I kind of went, and he said, I don't want to go into it. Like, it was just too traumatic to describe what happened to them from the moment they started moving to get out. And they knew that their 80-something-year-old grandmother would die on that process. So they left her, you know, and you're dealing with people making those kind of decisions every day. Like, there's a doctor in Sligo, a Palestinian man who was on the news there yesterday or the day before. His sister, who's a doctor in Palestine, all her children except one were killed the other day, and her husband is seriously injured in hospital. You know, so she's now sitting beside the bed of her one remaining child and her husband, and I think she had 6 other children who are dead. And here's this man in Sligo trying to get his head around this, not being able to do anything, you know. So I think we can talk nuance, but we mustn't waste too much time on it. You know, we must do whatever we can to stop this. And that means in Ireland persuading our local TDs to persuade our government, and we have immediate access. Like, nobody has access to their government and their leaders like Irish people. Persuading them to do things like enact the Occupied Territories Bill, to stop trade with Israel, these things. Like, I heard of a woman who is a human rights practitioner, and my daughter told me the other day that every single day she rings the Department of the Taoiseach and says, you know, I want you to enact the Occupied Territories Bill, stop trade with Israel. And that's, to me, like almost like a religious practice. You know, it's like every day, like, but it's really practical. It's and she can get, we all can get the number of the Taoiseach's office. And if we ring, they will log the call. Now, Simon Harris might go, oh, for fuck's sake, when he sees the list of calls. But those calls will be logged. We have a way of letting our government know exactly what we think and what we want. And I heard another story as well. And this is me thinking about me now and how I can make my activism mean something. Because I'm not into the whole, oh, I'm so sad, and doing Instagram stories about how devastated I am. Like, fuck that. But, oh yes, so I think this was an anti-Vietnam story, and I can't even remember where I heard it, but I heard it in the last couple of weeks. This man who, let's say he went to the perimeter of the White House every day during the war for, I don't know whether it was the 8 years of the high intensity or the actual 20 years that the war took, but every day he went and protested. And someone said to him, why are you doing this? You're not going to change anything. And he said, it's not that I want that. He said, I know I'm not going to change this. He said, but I'm doing this so that this won't change me. Mm-hmm. So that I maintain my humanity, my core beliefs, my central guiding star. I know what's right, so I will keep saying this. And I thought that's what we need to do, just hold on to that core truth, which is you can't murder people no matter how badly treated you've been. You can't do this. Yeah. And you can't take over somebody's land without sharing it with them. It's actually that simple. Mm. That's it.
That is it, I think. Yeah.
That was really powerful, Paula. I'll be chewing on that for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. That was very enjoyable.
This has been Weshtern Philosophy. Follow us on all the socials at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can join our Patreon to help the show grow or make a one-off donation via the Ko-fi link in the episode description. We'll be back next week with more chats and another topic. Slán.